Hi, welcome to the Factorologist. The four prominent US presidents carved into Mount Rushmore were chosen by sculptor Gutzon Borglum to represent major milestones and ideals in American history. George Washington, the first president, was chosen as a symbol of the birth of the nation. Thomas Jefferson represents the expansion of the country through the Louisiana Purchase. Abraham Lincoln was picked for his role in preserving the Union, and Theodore Roosevelt symbolizes the nation's industrial growth. While all of these famous figures are known for their pivotal roles in the country's history, there's much more to each of their stories. Here are 6 interesting facts about the Mount Rushmore presidents. George Washington only had a grade school education. America's first president may be one of the most notable figures in the country's history, but his legacy all started with a modest education. George Washington was born into a Virginia plantation family in 1732, and his formal schooling was limited to his preteen years. When Washington was just 11 years old, his father died, and plans for the future president to follow in his family's footsteps and attend Appleby Grammar School in England were halted. Washington instead received private tutoring for his further, albeit limited, education, and he continued to pursue self-education throughout his life. He read books on military strategy and history, which later informed his approach to his military career, in turn laying the groundwork for his path to the presidency. He studied geometry and trigonometry on his own, both of which came in handy for his stint as a land surveyor as a teen. But even with all of his successes, Washington carried embarrassment about his lack of formal education throughout his life, often comparing himself to his peers. Thomas Jefferson was a self-taught architect. Though not formally trained, Thomas Jefferson had a deep passion for and understanding of architecture, and he put it to practical use, designing some iconic American buildings that still stand today. From his days as a student at the College of William and Mary, where he is said to have purchased his first architecture book, through his time as the United States Minister to France from 1785 to 1789, Jefferson immersed himself in his own self-directed study of European architecture, particularly classical and Palladian styles. He continued to collect books on the subject, as well as many other subjects, eventually amassing one of the country's largest private libraries. Upon returning to the United States, the third president found opportunities to apply his knowledge. One of his most famous architectural achievements is Monticello, his own Virginia home. He also designed the Virginia State Capitol building in Richmond, which is considered one of the first neoclassical buildings in the United States, as well as the iconic Rotunda at the University of Virginia. Jefferson designed and built his Virginia vacation home too, the stunning and personal Poplar Forest, one of his many octagon-shaped designs, but the only one that came to fruition. Theodore Roosevelt impaired his vision in a White House boxing match. Theodore Roosevelt developed his renowned physical vigor and adventurous spirit at a young age. Growing up in New York City, the future president suffered from childhood asthma, and his father encouraged him to combat its weakening effects on the body by building his physical strength. By the time Roosevelt headed to Harvard University, he had transformed into a physically fit and self-assured athlete. He found his place on the wrestling mat and in the boxing ring, and his asthma symptoms mostly subsided. Throughout his career in the military and politics, including as the governor of New York and later President of the United States, Roosevelt continued his active exploits whenever possible. He regularly boxed at the White House, often with his aides, and one of these sparring matches left Teddy with damaged blood vessels, hemorrhaging, and eventually a detached retina, causing permanent impaired vision in his left eye. The injury may have kept him down, but not out, and Roosevelt continued to pursue physical activities, including jiu-jitsu and his beloved hunting. Roosevelt wrote in his autobiography, "If it had been the right eye, I should have been entirely unable to shoot." Abraham Lincoln created the Secret Service on the day he was assassinated. On April 14, 1865, just hours before he was tragically shot by John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., President Abraham Lincoln signed legislation creating the Secret Service. At the time, however, the new department's purpose was not to provide presidential protection. It was to combat counterfeit currency. By the end of the Civil War, nearly one-third of the U.S. currency in circulation was forged. The Secret Service was founded as a bureau within the Treasury Department to rehabilitate and safeguard the country's monetary system. The night of Lincoln's assassination, just one local police officer was assigned to escort the president from the White House to the theater, but the officer's whereabouts at the time of the shooting are unknown. It was not until after the assassination of President William McKinley in 1901, when Vice President Theodore Roosevelt took over, that the Secret Service's mandate was expanded to include the protection of the president. George Washington bred the first American foxhound. Presidential pets have long been beloved members of America's first families, dating all the way back to the first U.S. president. George Washington had a deep affection for dogs. He owned and bred various breeds that accompanied him throughout his personal and public life. Though it's thought that Washington primarily kept canines for fox hunting, historians believe he loved them as pets too, frequently visiting their kennels and mentioning them in writings and correspondence. The first president kept a variety of breeds at his Mount Vernon home, including Dalmatians, greyhounds, mastiffs, pointers, hounds, and more. Some of their names included Sweet Lips, True Love, Tippler, Drunkard, and Madame Moose. Washington's aim to breed a faster hunting dog was at least somewhat successful. He is widely recognized as the father of the American foxhound. A 6-year-old Theodore Roosevelt watched Abraham Lincoln's funeral procession. On April 25, 1865, 10 days after Abraham Lincoln's death, the late president's funeral procession made its way through the streets of New York City. Thousands of mourners lined the streets to pay their respects to the fallen leader, and among the spectators was Theodore Roosevelt, who was just 6 years old at the time. In a famous photograph of the event, shown above, Roosevelt can be seen looking out from a window in his grandfather's home as the procession passed through Broadway and Union Square. Standing with him is his brother, Elliott Roosevelt. Later, when Teddy Roosevelt himself became president, he didn't shy away from expressing his admiration of Lincoln, telling friends he was my great hero and that he meant more to me than any other of our public men. If you want to learn more about various facts, please subscribe to The Factorologist. Until next time.